All right, we're going to talk about seaplanes. And there's two different designs. You can have a boat hull seaplane, or you can have a conventional airplane on floats. So there at the bottom left is part of the Grumman series. They made a huge number of these around World War II, and many of them are still flying. You can see always probably 15 or 20 of these at Oshkosh every year in different sizes. The Widgeon is the smallest, the Albatross is the biggest. I forget if that's like a Martin Mars up there on the top left. There were some huge, truly huge seaplanes. Boeing, Sikorsky, and Martin, I think, all made huge seaplanes during World War II and just before. The Bush pilots don't like the small boat-hulled seaplanes, like the Lake Amphibian, and I guess the Icon they probably wouldn't like if it ever did ship up there to Alaska. I think one issue with the boat-hulled planes is they're very hard to dock. You have to design some kind of special dock for them. They're really designed more for beaching, whereas the float planes very naturally come up to a dock like a boat. That's one issue. So yeah, you might think those float planes look so unstable, but the Bush pilots love them. It's hard to get on and off the water, which is why a practical seaplane really should have, in most cases, a turboprop engine to get enough power to really get off the water. So we do have in Alaska locally. It's called Maine. There's a fair amount of seaplane flying up there. These are a couple US government planes. If you want to know why your taxes are going in the direction that they're going, look on the bottom right. That was the government's. I saw these two planes side by side on the ramp. Portland, Maine has a wonderful FBO called Mac Jets, which is very hospitable. They have crew cars, reasonably priced, 100 low lead. They're really just operating it as a gift to the piston crowd. Of course, they're really there for the turbine. As a business, they're there for the jets. But it's a great place that you can use and jump in the crew car, go into town. But anyway, on the ramp, I happen to see there's a little piston Cessna on floats that they bought, 15 or 20 years ago for Fish and Wildlife Patrol or something. I think this is a federal government airplane, and now they have this monster thing that they're replacing it with that has a fire-breathing turboprop engine, probably costs 5 times as much per hour to run. Okay, every year in September, there is the Moosehead Lake Seaplane fly-in, and you might ask, can you fly in there in an East Coast Aero Club plane that you've rented? The answer is yes, although you probably can't fly back out if you choose the lake as your landing destination, but there is a wheeled airport there as well that's pretty reasonable. I think it's about a 4,000-foot runway. So if the weather's nice, that's a great place to go up in Moosehead Lake. It's a long drive. It's about probably a 5-hour drive from here. The hard thing about seaplanes is if the float is all the way in the water, it will never take off. There's so much drag. You have to get up on the step, which if you're a boater corresponds to getting up on the plane, I guess, of a planing hull. So basically, you can't have the entire float in the water if you ever want to take off. Let's just show a short YouTube video here. We have no sound. Oh well, that's fine. So you can see this caravan on floats. I think it's a caravan. It's beginning to get up on the step, and finally it can break loose. Anyway, that's how it's done. Crosswind Landing. This is how it's done according to the FAA. So the FAA's mission the FAA's mission is, in addition to regulating aviation, they're explicitly supposed to promote aviation. It's a rare agency, so part of their mission is to encourage people to fly, and this is the best that they can do for seaplanes. So it does tell you, like I was telling you, the problem with seaplanes is, if you make an error on Hanscom on runway 29, first of all, it's 150 feet wide, and the gear on your airplane might only be 10 feet wide, so you can slide quite a bit left or right before you even leave the pavement. And if you do leave the pavement, you're skidding along the grass, and the owner is going to have some harsh words for you, perhaps. But otherwise, nothing too dramatic is going to happen. Glassy. This is the FAA's Glassy water landing demonstration. So if there's no wind at all, you might think, well, that's great, that's perfect for seaplane flying. It's hard to judge where the water is. A little bit of wind that causes some ripples on the water makes it much easier to judge your distance. So here's your alternatives. You can not flare at all and crash into the water that way, or you can flare too high and then crash into the water. What's that? Those are the only possibilities. What's the question? Radar altimeter?
No. So for seaplanes, do you wait until you achieve VR to pull up while taking off, or you kind of have the floats clear the water and just take off?
The question is, do you wait until VR to take off, or do you just wait till the floats clear the water and take off? That's a good question. It's so inefficient to be dragged into the water. I think you lift out of the water just as soon as you can, and then you'll probably, float. You'll fly along in ground effect for a little bit, and then finally take off. But yeah, just like just like on a soft field, like slightly muddy grass or something, the best thing you can do is to get away from the surface that's dragging on you. Great question. All right, here's docking and beaching. So one challenge with the seaplane, if you're all by yourself, is you have to be tremendously agile and nimble to sort of get out of the plane, kill the engine, scramble around, usually the front of the airplane and the propeller, because you're sitting on the left, and I don't know, the passengers are going to get off on the right, and tie up the airplane to the dock. It's very hard to do. That's one of the hardest things I think about seaplanes. And also, if the magnetos aren't perfectly grounded, airplane engines can start by themselves. After saying, we shouldn't tell you stuff that's scary, if it's not perfectly grounded by that switch, and that you don't starve the engine of the fuel by killing it with the mixture, it may be able to start all by itself, at least run for half a rotation or a full rotation, and hurt somebody. So you always want to be cautious around propellers and not spin them. But of course, if you're trying to get around the front of your seaplane, the propeller is the most obvious thing to grab onto. Anyway, that's. I don't think I would ever want to fly a seaplane unless there were dock handlers who were going to deal with that part of welcoming the airplane to the dock and tying it all up. But of course, the folks in Alaska, they do this all the time. So have respect when you see a seaplane. So there are a lot of bad things that you can do. Believe it or not, landing in the sea is something that's almost impossible in a seaplane, because there's too much in the way of waves. They're really for harbors, rivers, lakes. If you have more than a foot of, if the waves are more than about a foot, it just bangs up the seaplane so much that it'll be damaged. Landing the amphibious plane with the wheels down is one of the most common mistakes. You might think the software would fix this. That you have a database of where all the runways are in the U.S. You have a database of where the lakes are and other bodies of water, but you don't even really need that. So you could have you could have a camera out the front that can tell the difference between water and not water. So you would think that the airplane would provide significant assistance in configuring an amphibious plane with either the wheels down for a hard surface, or the floats, or just the bare floats for water. And there's very little of that, unfortunately. There's certainly nothing like the intelligence that I'm describing. You might be able to press a button and have the plane tell you with a synthesized voice as an aftermarket thing. The wheels are down for runway landing or something. So one common thing that people forget, and not that common, but this is an illustration of why you might want a two-pilot crew. But there's a video that's linked here from the slide about a father. Sounds like a good pilot and a careful pilot. He was with his son, and he left the wheels down, landed in the water, flipped over, and the son was killed. Really tragic. So watch that if you want to cry. But anyway, I think it's a good illustration of, an amphibious seaplane operation is a great example of where a two-pilot crew with the checklist would be very unlikely to have that kind of accident. So it also illustrates, how it's too bad that these manned airplanes don't have 1/100th of the intelligence of a DJI drone. There are rare exceptions. Like I said, at Burning Man, the terrain warning system had to be silenced because it was freaking out that we were not going to make it, even though there was a 5,000-foot temporary runway that had been rolled out there by the burners, the Uber burners. Okay, salt waters. People do this commercially, but the airplane has to be hosed off every day because the salt water is corrosive, even to aluminum. Question?
Lakes and harbors tend to have a lot of people on them. How do you avoid hitting a swimmer or a boater or that kind of thing?
Yeah, how do you avoid hitting swimmers and boaters in lakes and harbors? That's one of the challenges of seaplanes. If you're cleared to land at an airport, the air traffic controller has looked out at the runway, made sure that there's no other aircraft, pretty sure that there's no deer on the runway. The seaplane you have to kind of orbit around. It's a little bit like landing a helicopter off airport to really make sure that there's nobody in a canoe. I will tell you that from my seaplane training up in Maine, I have a seaplane rating that I got up in Maine, and there's a great school up there called Twitchell's. But anyway, if you see, like kayakers, they can paddle pretty fast when they see a seaplane in the vicinity, head towards the shore. But yeah, there could be a log in the water. So there are hazards that you can't control and get rid of. So the accident rate does tend to be higher. In the military, I think there's a slide later where we talk about that. They've gotten away from seaplanes and into helicopters for that reason. Because the helicopter, you can be down to within 2 feet of the ground and say, I don't like what I see, I'm going to go somewhere else. The propeller tends to get beaten up. You'll see some seaplanes designs where the propeller is up high and in the back, and that's to keep the water. The propeller is going near supersonic speeds at the tips, so if it gets water on it, it'll be eroded. Same deal with flying your airplane in heavy rain. You can get erosion on the leading edges of the wing and on the prop. All right, so the seaplane pilot skills include a lot more judgment. To some extent, there'll be the dimensions of these lakes, and even in Alaska, there's even a lighted water runway. But generally speaking, you don't have a lot of information to go by, so you've got to evaluate all this stuff by yourself. One thing you can do, I'll use this coffee cup as an example. You can usually see where the wind's coming from. If there's trees all around the lake will be calm right next, let's assume this coffee cup is a tree. The lake will be calm and glassy right next to the tree, and that tells you the wind is coming from this direction because that part of the lake is being sheltered from the wind. So you can actually read the wind off the lake by looking at which parts are rippled and which parts are glassy. But you still have to decide, are there floating logs in the water? Are there swimmers? Are there boats? Here's some unusual skills that you have to have. Well, you might have to have after maintenance or to get the airplane maintained. Wow. All right, so that was straight floats in the grass. So at the end of the season, you want to get the airplane maintained. There's not a lot of airplane mechanics hanging around the typical lake. So you just landed on the floats in the grass at an airport. And what about when you want to get it out? Yeah, to get the sound, watch that at home. So as I said earlier, the problem with seaplanes is that it's just a lot less forgiving than hard surface runway, which is the most forgiving environment. You can enhance that safety with a 2-pilot crew, especially an experienced seaplane pilot, or Here's stuff that'll be on the test. You can learn about accident reporting. So this is a different part of the federal regulations. This is the part that relates that regulates what the NTSB does, National Transportation Safety Board. So first they define what an accident is. So there has to be, a serious injury, and they define, if you go in there, they kind of define what a serious injury is. And I think substantial damage to the aircraft, if it's just the landing gear that's a bit trashed, I don't think that qualifies. If somebody dies within 30 days of the accident, it becomes fatal. Here's your definition of serious injury. Not too much fun. You have to immediately notify the NTSB if the flight controls malfunction. They don't really care if the Lycoming or Continental piston engine fails in some way. But if the flight controls fail and you can't bank your Cessna or Piper or Cirrus, that's something they want to hear about. If more than half of your glass cockpit goes dark, they want to hear about that. I think 830.15 is kind of in the test something. There's time periods, like report within 10 days of the accident. Oh yeah, and you're required info when notifying. Okay. So the bottom line on seaplanes is that it does combine, the hazards of a boat and a plane, and therefore you need the skills of both a sailor and a pilot to manage those hazards. On the other hand, I think it's a lot of fun. When the Icon first came out at $100,000 and change, I thought, well, this would be great. We'll just get one of these. We'll split it 4 ways. We'll keep it at Hanscom. And then, we'll go up for a 15-minute flight to New Hampshire, splash and dash, come back, and it'll be really cool. Now that it's a $400,000 airplane, it's not enough. It's
Send it to report like within 10 days. But it said, what does overdue mean?
Overdue. The question is, let's go back to that slide. Yeah, file a report within 7 days if an aircraft is overdue. So that means you expected an airplane to come back from the fishing camp in Alaska, and it hasn't returned. So you don't know if it's crashed or not. That was like me. Remember I told you that story about landing at PDK in Atlanta, and I forgot to close my flight plan, and so my Diamond Star was considered overdue, and I kept rejecting calls from an unfamiliar phone number. Not my proudest moment. All right, so insurance is kind of expensive, as I noted, especially for the amphibs. An airplane on straight floats isn't that much more expensive to insure than a regular airplane. Actually, that's a great way to evaluate risk. If an insurance company is willing to write a policy for a Cessna on floats, it can't be all that dangerous. But like I said, the military has decided let's do most of the things we used to do with seaplanes with helicopters. Question?
Insurance, which is also a question related, but different. What about, so our insurance, do we have to have personal insurance? So like if we fly, but we hurt ourselves, is our, like our medical coverage, do we not cover that? Because you're saying maybe you're doing something.
Oh, no, I think, the question is, does your regular medical insurance cover an injury from flying? Sure, yeah, there's no exclusion for that. I think sometimes if you got an umbrella liability policy, they say, well, that's great, but we're not going to pay out $5 million if you injure somebody with your Cessna. So they can have exclusions. AOPA has a big insurance business actually selling life insurance at pretty reasonable rates to pilots. So there again, that tells you, when your friend says, you're stupid, why would you fly a Piper or a Cessna? That thing's old, it doesn't look safe. You can say, well, insurance companies aren't stupid, and they have a huge business marketing life insurance to the members of AOPA who are all flying little airplanes like this. And it's only a 10% higher rate than what you can get in the market elsewhere. Of course, pilots are healthier than that's one issue, right? Since pilots by definition have passed a medical exam, they tend to be a little bit healthier than average. Same reason like the military, the death rate of people who serve in the military is quite a bit lower than the death rate of the same age people who are in the civilian workforce, partly because not that many of them are actually, in combat, and partly because the military rejects people who are unhealthy. So you're not going to die of cancer at age 23 if you're in the military, because they would have not let you enlist probably if they saw that you were suffering from the beginning stages of cancer. All right, light sport flying boats. Sea Ray is fun. This is a real one. There's 700 of these out there, and they sell it as a kit, and they also sell it as a built airplane. So here it is. Look how much fun. Somebody put one of these on a yacht and flew it in all different parts of the world. They would take off, I guess they would winch it down into the water, take off, fly around, and then winch it back up. And I think they were in some fairly open oceans at the time, and the thing survived. So that's pretty cool. They stuff a Garmin G3X glass cockpit in there. That's the same thing as the Game Bird has. The light sport folks have a lot of flexibility. It has a Rotax engine, which is conventional. The Icon A5 is the airplane. See, look at Oshkosh there. Their booth is always packed. People love it. People want it. And it's one of the few airplanes that's marketed to people that don't have any flying experience. I wrote a review of it in 2010 saying that it would be available in 2014. I think it had been originally promised for 2012. So it's just kind of coming out. But these composite planes are hard to manufacture. I talked to the Game Bird guys. They said they spend 500 person hours prepping the airplane to be painted, just like sanding and smoothing everything to be painted. So I think it's just very hard to make these things at an economical price. We still don't have sound, I don't think, do we? Here's my review of the plane. I made this little video that was fun. Well, I thought it was fun. I'm sure Icon doesn't think it's fun. All right, questions about seaplanes? Who wants one? Who would buy an Icon if it were reasonably priced? A lot of people question it.
We're talking about like jumping the side of the lake and you don't land on a sea, but what would be your opinion about the Great Lakes? I know like sometimes the waves can be higher than a foot, but like you just like look at it and judge what the waves might be at the hero.
The question is, what would my opinion be of landing in the Great Lakes? I think people do do a lot of flying of seaplanes up in the Great Lakes. But there again, the Great Lakes, there are harbors, there are calmer areas, so I think they're not really landing in the middle of the Great Lake, and then they don't say, like, I just want to go to the middle of Lake Superior and fish off the float for a while. They're going to some destination, and by definition, the destination will have a calmer area for boats to hang out in. I think there's actually a commercial seaplane service that's starting up between Manhattan and Boston. So you'll go to there's a seaplane, I should have mentioned this, for helicopters. There are helipads all around Manhattan, so you can actually go to the downtown Wall Street heliport, land. It used to be really cheap. It was $75 an hour for parking, I think, or maybe 25. It was, I don't know, it was not that much more than parking a car. Go in and have lunch. Now they've lease those helipads to some government crony monopoly that owns all three of them, and they crank the rates up by a factor of 4 immediately. But anyway, I don't know if it's the same company, but they have a seaplane, a public seaplane port there on the East River. And I think it's a Cape Air affiliate maybe that's going to start operating downtown to downtown in a Cessna Caravan on floats.